So now we're briefly going to talk about inheritance and polymorphism. These are two topics specific to object-oriented programming, the things it allows you to do. So object-oriented programming does provide for classes to inherit commonly used variables. So I may have variables that I write that will be repetitive in some nature, and I'm able to repeat their use in other classes. So an easy way to understand this is we'll have a class here called Quadrilateral, which has four integers, s1, s2, s3, s4. And we may have a class called Rectangle that if it inherits from Quadrilateral, it will inherit the actual s1, s2, s3, s4 variables. And so they do not need to be declared within Rectangle. We may have created methods called getLength and getWidth, which are not inside of Quadrilateral because at that point, let's say it didn't make sense for it to have a particular length or width. You may have only had something about a particular side. But I can even go further and say that square class will inherit from rectangle, and it will inherit everything s1, s2, s3, s4, as well as the other methods, getLength and getWidth, which were in rectangle. But we can add in an additional method called getSide if we wanted to. So what we're doing is we're leveraging the capability of inheriting both some states, some variables, as well as behaviors that are defined within parent classes. So what makes a good candidate for this is called the is a kind of test. Square is a kind of rectangle, and rectangle is a kind of quadrilateral. So if you can say is a kind of, it's generally a good practice that square can inherit from rectangle, and rectangle is a kind of quadrilateral, so therefore it can inherit from it as well. And each time we inherit, we're probably adding more specifics. So we want to add something specific to square that makes sense. GetSide is more specific to square than it is to rectangle, and getLength and getWidth are more specific to rectangle than they are to quadrilateral. Now Java only supports single inheritance, which means we can only extend one class at a time. However, you can extend from multiple parents. So what that means is square can inherit from rectangle, which inherits from quadrilateral. There is this linear approach here to inheritance. Square could not inherit from rectangle and quadrilateral directly. That would be a form of multiple inheritance. Some programming languages do provide for multiple inheritance. Java does not. However, Java does have a way around it if it is kind of needed, and we'll see that when we talk about interfaces. So to basically handle inheritance, we use a new keyword called extends. And I've simplified this to just rectangle and square. So before where we said quadrilateral defined S1, S2, S3, and S4, I'm actually defining them now in rectangle for the purposes of streamlining the slides here. So we see that the variables S1, S2, S3, and S4 are declared here in integer, and we could have done this all in one line by saying int S1, comma, S2, S3, and S4. But for the purposes of this, we've done it this way. We've declared two methods, getLength and getWidth. When I now come down into the class square, again, notice my braces end this rectangle class, and I have braces for my new square class. We say class square extends rectangle, which means it will get all of these items that are here. Now, the visibility, when we use public, private, and protected, will determine whether or not square gets a particular item, but we'll deal with that a little bit later. So here, square has everything that rectangle does. S1, S2, S3, and S4 are now available for use directly. And I may actually have a function that says int setSide integer s, where basically it would take in a value s and then set s to s4, which is set to s3, which is set to s2, which is set to s1, and it may return a value, success or failure, 1 or 0. I may also have one that says int getSide, which will basically return s1 as an example, because we only need one side since they're all the same. So this is more definitive around a square. I would not do setSide or getSide within a rectangle. I might, in rectangle, do getLength and getWidth. Now, when we talk about polymorphism, polymorphism is a topic within object-oriented programming. And basically what it does, it says that subclasses can define specific behaviors that are different from their parent class, even though they'll use the same name. So this is basically called overriding. So here we see we have class rectangle with the declaration of the integer variables. I have two methods, getLength and getWidth, which perform some action. I now have class square extends rectangle. Now, Because of the extending and the subclassing of rectangle, it automatically has a get length and get width. But because I actually have now created a new method, get length and get width, this method will override these methods. So in other words, if we use get length within a square object, it will use this method as opposed to this one had this not been defined. And we can see this down here. Rectangle R equals new rectangle, square S equals new square. R.getLength will use the getLength method here, and S.getLength will use the getLength method here. If we did not override this getLength method in the square class, then the s.getLength, basically Java will look inside of square for getLength, so assume that this was not here, and since it could not find a getLength, it would use the one in the parent class. But because it is here, it uses this one. It will always use the method that is closer in scope than another one that is not closer in scope.